Welcome to the third video in the Essential Extract Vector Calculus series. In this video, we're going to talk about parametrizing curves and surfaces by vector functions. We'll talk about parametrizations, we'll have some discussion about what it means for a parametrization to be smooth or regular, and we'll talk about orientations of curves and surfaces, and for example, what it means for the boundary of a surface to be positively oriented with respect to the orientation on the surface. If you're following along with the Vector Calculus handout, a link to which can be found in the video description, what we're covering in this video is mostly what's described in this part of the section on line integrals, and in this part in the section on surface integrals. The stuff about orientation is also important if you want to understand later what these circles on the integrals at the bottom mean. First, let's talk about parametrizing curves by vector functions. Let's suppose we have a curve C in n-dimensional Euclidean space, and that we want to find a parametrization of this curve which starts at the point A and ends at the point B. If it seems confusing to think about a curve in Rn when n is bigger than 3, you can just think about a curve in three-dimensional space for now. We say that a vector function r from an interval ab to the space of vectors in n-dimensional Euclidean space parametrizes the curve C if r of a is equal to a, r of b is equal to b, and if the tips of the position vectors of r of t trace out the curve C as t varies from a to b. In order for parametrizations of curves to be useful to us, so that we could, for example, integrate or differentiate them, we want our parametrizations to satisfy certain basic assumptions. One example of such an assumption, which is implicit in a lot of people's descriptions of parametrizations, is that we could assume that the vector function r is injective or one-to-one. That would ensure that every point on the curve is traced out one time. There are some other blanket assumptions that we might want to go ahead and make just to avoid problems later on. Let's suppose that the component functions of our vector function r are given by x1 of t to xn of t. The first assumption that we want to make is that the derivatives of all of these component functions exist, and that the function that maps t to the vector x1 prime of t to xn prime of t is a continuous function. This is an example of what people might call a smoothness assumption. It's mainly here to guarantee that the integrals that we want to write down in later videos are well defined. I'd like to comment that different people's definitions of smoothness may vary. However, in almost all cases, when you say that a function is smooth, you just mean that a certain number of derivatives exist and are continuous. A second assumption that's good to have in place is to assume that the derivative r prime of t is never the zero vector. This guarantees that as r is tracing out the curve C, it can never stop and turn around. It's also going to allow us to define the unit tangent vector in just a moment. This is an example of what some people might refer to as a regularity condition on the parametrization. To be realistic, not every curve that we're interested in is going to satisfy these two hypotheses. In particular, there are many examples and applications of mathematics of curves that don't admit smooth parametrizations. In practice, we'll be happy as long as we can write the curves that we're interested in as a finite union of curves that are smooth and regular. Curves that have that property, that they can be divided up into a finite union of smooth and regular curves, are called piecewise smooth and regular curves. You'll see the assumption of piecewise smoothness in some of the theorems that we talk about later. Okay, before we leave this slide, if we assume that our curve is regular, that allows us to define the unit tangent vector to the curve at every point. The derivative r prime of t is a tangent vector to the curve at every point r of t that points in the direction of travel. In order to get a unit tangent vector, in other words, a tangent vector of length 1, we can just divide the vector r prime of t by its length. This is where we're using the fact that the curve is regular. Now let's move on to talk about parametrizing surfaces by vector functions. The main and obvious difference between parametrizing surfaces and curves is that surfaces are two-dimensional objects. So instead of using a vector function whose domain is an interval or a subset of the real numbers, to parametrize surfaces we want to use a vector function whose domain is a subset of R2. That's going to give us two parameters that we can vary in order to allow the tips of our vectors to trace out our entire surface. One thing to note here, I've drawn my set D as if it's a rectangle, but the set D doesn't necessarily have to be a rectangle. It could be another subset of R2, like a triangle or a disk. What the set D is, of course, is going to depend on the surface that you're trying to parametrize. Just as with parametrizations of curves, there are certain basic assumptions that we want to make about our parametrizations of surfaces. The surfaces that we're going to work with in the theorems that I'm going to show you are all going to be subsets of R3. So for the sake of stating these assumptions, I'm going to restrict to the case where my parametrization R is a map from a subset D of R2 to the space of vectors in three-dimensional Euclidean space. Let's write the components of our parametrization as x, y, and z. Each one of these component functions is going to depend on uv, and uv is going to come from the set D. The first assumption that I want to make is that the partial derivatives of the x, y, and z functions with respect to the variables u and v all exist and are continuous. As before, this is what we might refer to as a smoothness condition on the parametrization. The corresponding regularity condition that I want to enforce is that the cross product of the partial of r with respect to u and the partial of r with respect to v is never equal to the zero vector. The reason for this regularity condition, as you're about to see, is that it allows me to define a normal vector, which is orthogonal to the tangent plane of my surface at every point. To explain how that works, let's suppose that I'm at the point r of u0, v0 in the surface. In the picture that I've drawn, that point is the intersection of the image of the vertical line through u equals u0 and the horizontal line through v equals v0 in D. The images of those line segments are the red and green curves pictured here. Zooming in on this picture, a tangent vector in the direction of the red curve at the point r of u0, v0 is given by taking the partial derivative of r with respect to v and evaluating it at u0, v0. Similarly, a tangent vector pointing in the direction of the green curve at the point r of u0, v0 is given by taking the partial of r with respect to u and evaluating it at u0, v0. The cross product of those two vectors is a vector which is perpendicular to the plane determined by them. In other words, it's what we call a normal vector to the surface at that point. To get a unit normal vector to the surface, all we have to do is divide by the length of RU cross RV. You might notice two things about this definition. Number one, it's important that we're working in 3 dimensions, otherwise we wouldn't know how to define the cross product of two vectors. And number two, it's important that our surface is regular so that the denominator here is not 0. I mentioned before that not every curve that we're interested in is going to be smooth or regular, and similarly, not every surface is going to be smooth or regular. However, we'll be happy in most cases as long as we can write our curve or surface as a finite union of smooth and regular curves or surfaces. Of course, if we have such a piecewise regular curve or surface, there may be points where the unit tangent vector or unit normal vector are not defined. That's not going to cause us too much trouble, as long as we're careful to choose the parametrizations of the different pieces so that they fit together in a way that preserves the orientation. In order to make that statement precise, we should now spend a few minutes to talk about orientations of curves and surfaces. If we talk about orientations of curves by themselves, there's not really a lot to say. The orientation of a curve traced out by a smooth and regular parametrization is just the direction that the curve is traced out in. The parametrization in this picture gives the curve C the orientation that goes from A to B. The other possible orientation of this curve would be the orientation that goes in the opposite direction from B to A. For surfaces, we say that a surface S determined by a smooth regular parametrization is oriented if the unit normal vector varies continuously as a function of the parameters u and v. When this condition holds, we say that the parametrization RUV determines an orientation of S, and we also say that S is an orientable surface. Just as for curves, with orientable surfaces in R3, there are two possible orientations. To illustrate what I mean by that comment, here are the two possible orientations of the surface that we saw earlier in the video. With the top parametrization, I get unit normal vectors which point in the direction above the surface. However, with the bottom parametrization, I get unit normal vectors which point in the opposite direction below the surface. Notice that because of the way they're defined, the unit normal vectors to the surface at any point are determined by applying the right-hand rule to the corresponding tangent vectors at that point. Before we go further, unless you think that every surface that you're ever going to encounter is guaranteed to be orientable, I'd like to show you an example of a non-orientable surface. This is a prototypical example of a non-orientable surface called the Mobius strip. By the way, this image and some of the other computer-generated images in this video were created using a free program called OpenSCAD, which is something that I use to make models for 3D printing. I actually 3D printed this one and it came out nice, but the truth is that you can make your own Mobius strip just by getting a strip of paper, putting a twist in it, and taping two ends together. One small disclaimer that I have is that the surfaces that we're talking about in this video are infinitely thin, so you have to try to imagine that this, or your 3D printed model, or your strip of paper is infinitely thin, not having a front side and a back side. To get some understanding for why this surface is non-orientable, let's suppose that you start at this blue dot and that you try to parametrize the surface with the parametrization where the positive u direction goes this way and the positive v direction goes this way. By doing that, you're choosing an orientation where the unit normal vector points outward at this point. Now, as you follow that parametrization continuously around the Mobius band, there's no real problem until you start to get back towards where you started. Notice that by following this parametrization continuously around the Mobius band, my normal vector is now starting to point inward. When I take the limit as this parametrization approaches the point where it started, I end up with a normal vector that's pointing in the opposite direction from the one that I began with. In fact, it's possible to show that there's no way to give a parametrization of the Mobius band which allows for a continuous choice of the unit normal at every point. That's precisely what we mean when we say that a surface is non-orientable. For the final part of this video, I'd like to talk about what it means for the boundary of an orientable surface, or the boundary of a solid region in three-dimensional space, to have the positive orientation with respect to the orientation on the region. I'm going to do this in 3 steps. First of all, let's consider the case when our region is a surface which is contained in the plane R2. In this case, the boundary of the region is just a curve in the plane. It might actually be a union of curves, like in the picture here. And some typical assumptions that we might want to make are that the boundary is a finite union of simple, closed curves. To say that a curve is simple just means that it doesn't intersect or cross itself. And to say that a curve is closed means that it doesn't have any isolated endpoints, so that it forms a loop. In the example here, the boundary of the blue region D is a union of 2 simple closed curves. By the way, you probably already noticed this, but the notation for the boundary of a region D, whether that region happens to be a curve or a surface or even some higher dimensional region, is just to write the partial sign and then D. Okay, so what does it mean for the boundary of a region in R2 to be positively oriented? It's not just as simple as saying that we want to go clockwise or counterclockwise around the curve. In order for the boundary to be positively oriented, it has to have the property that as you're walking in the direction of the orientation, your left hand is pointing in towards the surface. Practically, what that means is that if you're on a piece of the boundary which is on the outside of the region, the orientation is counterclockwise. But if you're on a piece of the boundary which is on the inside of the surface, then the positive orientation is clockwise. In any case, just remember what I said, that the positive orientation is the orientation with the property that, as you walk in the positive direction, your left hand points in towards the surface. Next, let's consider the case when we have an oriented surface in R3 that's not contained in the plane R2. In the picture here, the boundary of this purple region is a union of 2 simple closed curves in 3-dimensional space, which I've indicated in orange and green. In order to choose the positive orientation on the boundary in this case, we want to choose the direction of travel with the property that, if we're walking along the curve with our body upright in the direction of the unit normal vectors to the surface near that point, then our left hand is pointing inward toward the surface. That means that on the orange part of the boundary, the positive orientation will be this way, while on the green part of the boundary, the positive orientation will be this way. Notice that the orientation on the surface is important when we try to decide what the positive orientation on the boundary is. If we chose the opposite orientation on the surface, then we would get the opposite orientation for the positive orientation on the boundary. Finally, let's talk about what it means for the boundary of a solid region in R3 to have the positive orientation. Keep in mind that the boundary of a solid region in R3 is a surface. So for example, in the picture here, you should think of this as a solid silo-shaped region in R3. The boundary of this region is then the outer purple piece that you see. Because we live in 3 dimensions and we can't see through the outer shell of this region into the inside parts, there may be some aspects of this definition that are a little harder to visualize than in the lower dimensional examples. However, it's pretty easy to define what we mean by the positive orientation of the boundary of a solid region in R3. We just mean the orientation where all of the unit normal vectors point away from the solid region. The only subtlety here would be if there were some cutout piece inside this region that you couldn't see. However, if that happened, the surface which makes up that part of the boundary inside the region would still have the positive orientation as long as its unit normal vectors pointed inward away from the solid region. Hopefully that's not too complicated to understand, but anyway, we're not going to deal with complexities like that in the later videos. Well, that's the end of this video. Thanks for watching. In the next video, we're going to talk about 3 kinds of line integrals in vector calculus.